Hi everyone. Today I had a new
That chopper
video.
looks like it's taking the evac center tomorrow.
I've always been very inspired by
Reload.
guys like Beach Bomber Guy and Jakey,
Reloading.
things like that, and they've always made me want to do longer form videos. So today that's what I'll be trying out. What I wanted to make a video on was two games that I think are very similar in execution. Dark Souls 2 and Hollowknight silksong. Now, at first, that's going to sound a little bit crazy. They don't seem that similar. But I feel like the way they went about being a sequel and the way people reacted to it is incredibly similar. So, uh, I think the over-the-top dislike some fans exhibited towards Dark Souls 2 caused the developers to go back on ideas that were genuinely better. Obviously, I'm kidding. Dark Souls 2 as a game is always been very interesting to me. It's one of my favorite games of all time. It's the first Dark Souls I ever beat, one of the first games I ever owned on the PlayStation 4, and it's just so interesting to me how I can like a game so much. Pretty much everyone around me thinks that it's horrible. But Dark Souls 2 made lots of major changes to the formula of how the first Dark Souls did things. Uh, the challenge is just fundamentally different. It's slower, clunkier, a bunch more enemies. Placement is a lot more sporadic. Feels like they're trying to hide the enemies from you a lot more. Um, and when you go back to the elements in the further games like Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, you can tell what the B team kind of exhibited to the fans and to the developers that really they were more of a fan of the faster gameplay. Now, Hollow Knight Silksong, um, honestly, to me, goes about being a sequel in a very similar way. It changes a lot fundamentally about the original Hollow Knight's gameplay loop. The actual challenge is fundamentally so different. It's obviously the same Metroidvania, Souls-like, where you've got combat, parkour, bosses, etc. But a lot, you have resource management now. The way you do combat can be so much more different because you have the hunter tools. You can make an entire build based around jumping people to death, and it's a lot more mechanically focused. Which the original Hollow Knight 2 had a lot of tech that you could do. You could break that game like nothing I've ever seen to beat it in like 2 seconds. But my question is, when you have these games that are sequels to such smash hits like Dark Souls 1, Hollow Knight, immediate modern classics, how do you go about making a sequel in a way that lives up to the fans' expectations? And can you even do that without just making the same game? Um, I've always seen the way you go about doing a sequel in kind of a way of you have Resident Evil 1, slow, puzzle focused zombie survival game. And Resident Evil 2 is almost identical, except for the story being different and the movement being a little bit better, and obviously the location is different. Now, games like Dark Souls and Hollow Knight Silksong don't really have that liberty, especially with the state of modern gaming. You're kind of pressured as a developer to come up with something new. Silksong did that in a much different way than Dark Souls 2. They took the original system and established in Hollow Knight and just added on to it. You know, you've got more charms, you've got more movement, you've got more ways to use your movement. Even your base move set can be changed and altered. The way you heal can be different or the same if you like the Hollow Knight healing. But Dark Souls 2 went for more of a from the ground up, we're going to make the game this way that is very mechanically opposed to the way they did Dark Souls 1. Bosses are slower, tankier, areas are a lot smaller and kind of lead to these sprawl sections and then small little tunnels, and there are a lot more enemies, obviously, and the way you go about fighting them is way different because everything's slower. And I'm a fan of it. I can see why people aren't. It's definitely not the most rewarding or engaging combat system. But I think, and this is kind of my point. I'm interested in what you guys think. I think that both of those games are amazing. They're both some of my favorite games of all time. But I think sequels should lean more towards how Hollow. I think Hollow Knight Silksong is a better sequel than Dark Souls 2. Not necessarily a better game, but I think Team Cherry understood how to go about making a sequel better than the B team at From Software, because instead of just almost remaking the whole system, they added on to it. And I think that led to the game ultimately being more fun and being less critiqued and allowing for a vaster variety in the gameplay. Um, and as Dark Souls 2, you've got a ton of variety in the spells, a lot of all new stuff is good. But the stuff that was already good in Dark Souls, they unnecessarily changed. You know, you've got Estus, which is a great system. It rewards the player for playing well, not taking damage, because you have to keep more of your Estus. But they decide to add life gems, which kind of ruin the flow. You know, you don't really need to use your Estus flask even. It's kind of crazy. But Silksong says, okay, so Hollow Knight has a healing mechanic that works. No one complains about it. It makes sense. It's easy for the player to understand. Let's add on to it with different passives. Like you have the Reaper Crest, where every time you heal, you get a little buff that gives you more silk to heal with or use spells or whatever. Or you've got the Architect Crest, which lets you use a heal instead of healing to refill your tools. And I think that's just a better way to go about it. You take the system and you add on to it. Instead of like, okay, so... And Dark Souls 2 does that in some good ways. Like you have the kick in Dark Souls 1, which is good. There's not a problem with the Dark Souls 1 kick. But they add guard breaking, which I feel works a lot better and is a better addition to gameplay than just, oh, let's just do the kick again. And that's already what was in there. But a lot of the flaws of Dark Souls 2, which I unfortunately have to accept, come from them just changing things that were not necessary. And it's needless innovation is the term. And some of it's good. I like the slower combat, personally, but I also like the faster combat that's in Bloodborne and all. But I'm honestly interested in what you guys think. And I think I'm gonna pose a question. How would you go about making a sequel? That's all. Stay dusty.